Greetings and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Maggie. One of the most satisfying things that can happen in a daily run is that the first floor doesn't have any combat whatsoever. You can just enter, get your items, and actually get out at the end. Even though we're fighting Ragman, that's not that big of a deal because he was nerfed a few patches ago and now he has less overall HP, so the fight doesn't take a gazillion years anymore, it just takes like a minute at most, even with base damage and with base Maggie speed and whatever. But one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is how important those first minutes are, because you tend to go on the first and the second floor. Let's say that you have like a timeline of 3 minutes per floor, but doing the first two floors and exiting them at 6 minutes, I would say it's so much better to leave at the 14th or at the 4th minute. Even though that might not seem like a lot and you're obviously saying, duh, it's better to leave the second floor at 4th minute than the 6th minute, I would just argue that it's much better for that to happen early on than later on. So you can imagine if you're at Necropolis 1 and you manage to leave at 17th minute or the 15th minute. Obviously you would much rather be in the position where you have 5 minutes to complete the floor and get to Mom, but even at 17th minute you already reached your maximum potential, so to say. You're not gonna get much stronger. But if you just have a free floor early on, not only does it allow you to get stronger individually without having to just worry about any items or bosses or enemies at all, but it also does allow you to spend more time into the arcades. I'm just saying, you essentially have more time early on, which you can use to do other things, and you can prioritize your time better. Of course, if you do that much later into the game, there's really not much you can do on that last floor of Mom, so you can either just end up wasting time by maybe playing the arcade, or you can just go to Mom immediately and do boss rush much early. And of course, in some situations, that's also what you want to do, so you can get to Hush later. But in most cases, I would definitely argue that it's much better to have more time, or at least more remaining time early on, so you can kind of divide your time on maybe the arcades or maybe the blood banks, or even just going to the shops and using the restock machine for as long as possible and still be in that time frame to get the boss rush. And I definitely thought that this daily was gonna turn out that way, even though I was kind of behind in a lot of cases, especially now. Just because of how overtuned the depths, well, not the depths one, but the caves 1, the 3rd, and the 4th floor are. It really does, it is noticeable. If you have no DPS upgrades, if you have no other items which would kind of help you deal with enemies a bit cleaner, or maybe any defensive items which you can use, or orbitals, or really whatever, anything, it does leave you in a position where your just base DPS, base tiers, and base damage is not going to be enough to deal with all of those enemies and still get out of it unscathed. And it's a really weird dynamic, because you would think that on the 3rd floor you wouldn't expect such a big jump in difficulty and just how many enemies there are. But the fact is, there are so many enemies in the depths one. I always say the depths one, but it's the caves one and something else. But nevertheless, there's so many enemies which spawn other enemies, and they innately have a lot of HP, and not only do they have a lot of HP, the enemies that they spawn also have a lot of HP, and in most cases they explode and it's just very tedious to deal with. Without any DPS upgrades, you can end up shooting him like 8 or 9 times per enemy, and if you have portals in the room, that takes even longer, and it's just such a tedious task to do, and a lot of people have quit this daily very early on just because of that. I can't blame anyone for that. Obviously I'm the kind of person who tries to persevere through every bad daily, even if that means dying at the end and meaning my score is overall much worse. But this particular one, I've just had hard times finding words what exactly went wrong. I think it's just due to nature of the balance of the game, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do that I think maybe certain items are overpowered or underpowered. It's mostly that the items that you get out of bosses aren't guaranteed to be any form of guaranteed DPS upgrades. Like in the usual case, or at least in the old days, I remember the most of the time where you got something out of your boss, it was going to be very influential. It's gonna give you a stat up, it's gonna give you maybe some coins, or maybe in some cases it's gonna give you a tears upgrade, or maybe a range upgrade, something like that. And I would argue all those things are good in their own space or in their own circumstances. I guess it's maybe a bit of a better way to put it. But in this particular case, we just got HP upgrades, and that's obviously not something that you really need, or you really need as Maggie, and even if you get it, you can't really use it that well. What I think that the mistakes I made here are definitely that I should have leveraged that fact more. So at this point I had 7 cents when I left the floor. I decided to buy BOGO bombs just under the pretense that I'm gonna get more bombs and consumables and points out of that, and of course that's a very valid reason to purchase it. But I definitely think that in this case, because I had a lot of HP, I had a lot of ways with which I could have used my money, and I decided to pick Bum Friend just for the reason that if there is any extra money, he's gonna be able to pick it up and then trade that money maybe in cards, or maybe give me some good pills, and maybe I can get stronger that way. And for that reason, I should have played on the blood banks or just the arcades in general, because I think in this case they would have helped me immensely, and the fact that I kind of omitted that and I decided to spend it for BOGO bombs, I think is pretty telling that I made a mistake at some point in this run. Not only that, but we also had a lot of arcade machines, not a lot, but some arcade machines spawn, and in this situation where you're basically not in any rush, I don't have anywhere to go, I don't really have any way to spend my money, or any way to spend my damage, or just anything basically, so this direction I should have definitely focused on playing those arcade machines, hoping to get something good out of them. You never know, maybe you get a very weird rune, or maybe you get a sack which gives you a rune, or anything really. Isaac is very unpredictable in that sense that there's hidden paths or gems which can save your run in very weird places, and especially with this one, I think it would be very important for us to go and try to get to those places, just because it would put us ahead of the curveball. I think I finished this run at 50,000 points, which is obviously very low. You would expect 15,000 points on a run that goes to like the 5th floor, not the 6th floor, with the boss rush, and of course with the potential of getting further than that with AWAS rooms or the shovels. And especially because I didn't get any devil deals, I would imagine that some of those did have some breaking items or just much stronger items. In this situation, I thought that was going to really fall behind, but I still managed to rank like in the top 50 or maybe in the top 100, which is ridiculous when you think about it. The fact that you can have a 15,000 point run and still rank in the top 100 is pretty telling that there is something wrong with the game, and not necessarily the game, but with the overall balance in the game in some cases. And I do understand that Isaac is a game where you just have innately some very weak runs, and that's how it was designed. Sometimes you're gonna have very weak runs, and sometimes you're gonna have very strong runs. But my problem is that even with the weak runs, sometimes they can be quite fun, because it is intense, you have to focus, you have to dodge, but with runs where you're in a position like this, where it's not really due to you being weak, even though we are weak, but it's mainly due to just there being a lot of enemies you have to deal with in very weird circumstances, I think it makes for a much cheaper experience that isn't what you kind of bargained for. And maybe that's a bit weird, but I definitely think that in some cases that a certain floor should be undertuned, because it's kind of silly to me that the 5th and the 6th floor in this case were so much easier for me than the 3rd and the 4th floor, and the only difference in items that I got was Champion Belt, which is admittedly a damage up, and of course I also did get the mushroom for the Tears upgrade, and I can say that the new item which spawns flies and spiders didn't help, but it's just so silly to me that it scales that way, and the fact that even the Caves 1 can be sometimes a bigger floor than Moon 1, that just seems silly to me, and I really can't put my finger on it and exactly in which direction that went. Still, I can't complain too much. I did have a pretty decent run at the end. I couldn't complain too much. It was a fun one to some extent. It was me trying to kind of cheese and use the D7 to its greatest effect. I was trying to go and visit as many rooms as possible, and every time you use the D7, you get basically another chance, another room cleared, and there's another chance for the room back to pay out, and with that, of course, we could get an AWAS rune and go further. Sadly, that didn't happen, but there is one thing, like, if you take anything away from this video, or maybe any tip or trick I have for you, is that if you fight Greed in the shop and you kill Greed, and then you can use the D7, then the shop will restock, so you're gonna get the items back and you can buy them. I did that trick in this particular video. It wasn't that influential, I didn't get anything too good out of it. I got Mom's Key, which probably gave me some consumables in the end. But if you want to take away from this video, or maybe a secret, like a tip or a trick, this would be it. Even though the rest of the run was bad, I hope at least you can take that away and just maybe learn something new on the next daily you play. So 15,000 points, 87 plays, kinda ridiculous, but what can you do? I hope that you gave this run a try and that you really did see what a tough daily is, and what I consider a tough daily for all the wrong reasons, and I think it's a good insight into just how the game is balanced sometimes. And I'm not saying it's bad, I'm not saying it's good, I'm just saying it's something that you have to consider whenever you're playing dailies, and in these cases, whenever you play a round like this, you really have to wager all of your bets and really spend all the time and the patience in the world to try it and play those arcade machines, play to your strengths. In this case we had a lot of health, so we should have played for the blood banks and things like that, and I didn't, and I think definitely that cost me some ranks in the end, or just some of my overall score. Still, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.